What happens when a CEO walks into his own fast food restaurant as a customer, only to hear a heartbreaking truth from the cashier? Robert Sterling never imagined he'd have to investigate his own company like this. As the CEO of Sterling's Savories, a chain he had built with passion and dedication, he had always prided himself on good food and happy employees. But lately, complaints had been flooding in. Long wait times, cold food, employees quitting without warning. Something was deeply wrong, and Robert was determined to find out exactly what. Disguised in a simple hoodie and jeans, Robert stepped into one of his busiest locations in Denver, Colorado, during the lunch rush. He had visited this place many times before, but never like this. The energy inside was different from what he had envisioned when he first started his business. The bright lights cast a harsh glare over exhausted workers scrambling to keep up, and the sound of impatient customers huffing in frustration filled the air. He quietly joined the line, taking in everything. The tables were messy with leftover trays, the drink station was sticky with spilled soda, and the trash cans were overflowing. But the most troubling sight was the employees' faces, tight with stress, shoulders slumped, moving robotically like they were just trying to survive. The day. When it was finally his turn, he stepped up to the counter. The young cashier, a girl barely out of her teens, barely met his eyes. Her name tag read, Olivia. Her brown hair was hastily tied back, and her uniform looked like it had been through one too many shifts without a proper wash. She forced a smile, but it was weak, like someone who had smiled too many times when they didn't mean it. "Welcome to Sterling Savories. What can I get for you?" Robert glanced at the menu, pretending to decide. He could see the sweat on her brow, the exhaustion in her voice. He ordered a simple cheeseburger, fries, and a soda. As she punched in his order, a customer at the next register was arguing with another cashier about a wrong order. The manager, a man in his mid-40s with a permanent scowl, stood near the kitchen but didn't bother to intervene. Instead, he checked his watch, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. Robert frowned. A good manager should step in and handle the situation. Why wasn't he doing anything? Olivia handed Robert his receipt. As she did, she sighed softly and muttered, "I'm sorry, sir, but we're all treated like machines here." The words stopped Robert cold. His heart dropped into his stomach. Treated like machines? He had built this company on the idea of valuing employees, making them feel like they were part of something bigger. And yet here was one of his own workers apologizing for a broken system. He tried to keep his face neutral as he took his receipt. "Rough day?" he asked casually. Olivia let out a dry chuckle, shaking her head. "It's always like this." She glanced over her shoulder, lowering her voice. "We don't get breaks, we're always understaffed. And Victor—" She cut herself off, eyes darting toward the manager who had just disappeared into the back. "Never mind." Robert felt anger bubbling beneath the surface, but he kept it in check. Victor, the manager, he made a mental note of the name. His food was ready quicker than he expected, which would have been great if the burger wasn't cold, the fries weren't stale, and the soda wasn't flat. He picked at the meal, watching the employees work. The kitchen was in complete disarray, one cook trying to handle orders alone, another struggling to keep up with the fryer. The drive-through line was backed up, and instead of helping, Victor stood in the corner scrolling through his phone. The more Robert observed, the more it became clear. This wasn't just a bad shift. This was a broken system. He saw Olivia rushing between the counter and the drive-through window, doing the work of two people. A few customers grew impatient, rolling their eyes as they waited. One man sighed loudly, tapping his fingers against the counter. "Can you hurry up? I don't have all day." Olivia flinched but nodded quickly. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get it right now." She moved even faster, fumbling as she grabbed a bag from the warmer. But in her rush, her fingers slipped and the bag tumbled to the floor. Burgers and fries spilled across the counter and onto the dirty tile below. The irritated customer groaned. "Seriously?" Olivia looked mortified. Her hands trembled as she bent down to clean up the mess, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The moment stretched painfully long, and then Victor finally decided to step in. Instead of helping, he laughed. "Wow, Olivia, Maybe if you actually paid attention, you wouldn't be screwing up all the time. The restaurant fell silent. The cooks stopped what they were doing. The customers at the counter shifted uncomfortably. Olivia's face turned red, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Robert had seen enough. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. His hands curled into fists as he stared at Victor, who still wore a smug grin. "Hey!" Robert called out, his voice even but sharp. Victor turned lazily, eyebrows raised. "Yeah?" Robert clenched his jaw. "Why don't you clean it up instead?" Victor scoffed. "That's not my job." Robert took a step closer. "No, your job is to lead, but all I've seen you do is stand around and insult the people working harder than you." Victor narrowed his eyes. "Who do you think you are?" Robert exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had planned to spend more time gathering information to see just how deep the problems ran. But seeing Olivia, seeing all of them being treated this way, made something snap inside him. This wasn't just a failing system. This was his failing system. He had heard enough. He had seen enough. It was time to do something about it. The tension inside Sterling's Savories didn't ease after Robert's confrontation with Victor. It only grew heavier. The employees continued moving like machines, afraid to slow down, afraid to make a mistake. Robert, still undercover, knew he had only scratched the surface of the real problems festering in his business. Victor, visibly irritated by the earlier exchange, leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone while the line grew longer. Olivia wiped her eyes quickly and forced a smile at the next customer, pretending nothing had happened. But the energy in the restaurant had shifted. Some employees stole glances at Robert, sensing something different about him, and Victor had no idea that his worst day was about to begin. As Robert stepped away from the counter with his cold food, he positioned himself at a nearby booth where he could watch everything unfold. The chaos continued. The kitchen was severely understaffed, one cook trying to flip burgers while also keeping an eye on the fryer. The drive-through orders piled up on the screen, and employees scrambled to keep up, their exhaustion painted clearly across their faces. Then it happened again. Olivia, still shaken from earlier, was trying to keep up with the orders when a customer at the front counter grew impatient. He was an older man, his arms crossed as he tapped his fingers on the countertop. "Come." I've been waiting for 10 minutes. "It's just a burger and fries." Olivia swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm so sorry for the wait, sir. We're just really busy right now." Yeah, excuses. Just do your job." Robert's grip tightened on the edge of his tray. He saw the way Olivia flinched, the way her lips pressed together as she forced another apology. She was trying, they all were, but no one was helping them. Victor finally moved from his spot at the counter, not to help, not to ease the pressure, but to bark orders. "Olivia, pick up the pace. We're not running a charity here." That was it. Robert set his tray down and stood up, walking directly toward Olivia and Victor. The employees nearby paused their movements, sensing that something was about to happen. Victor turned to him, annoyed. "You again? What do you want now?" Robert crossed his arms. "I want to know why you're running this place, like a dictatorship." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Robert continued. "I've been here less than an hour, and I've seen nothing but stress, fear, and exhaustion from your employees. You stand around, give orders, and insult the people actually doing the work, and you think that's good management?" A hush fell over the restaurant. Employees stopped what they were doing. Customers, sensing the confrontation, turned their heads. Victor scoffed. "Look, buddy, I don't know who you think you are, but this is how the real world works. These kids need to toughen up. If they can't handle a little pressure, they shouldn't be here." Robert's blood boiled. He looked at Olivia, who stood frozen, her eyes darting between the two men. He looked at the other employees, their expressions, a mix of fear and hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally stand up to Victor. He turned back to Victor. "And what about their breaks, their schedules? You've got people working double shifts with no rest. That's against company policy." Victor rolled his eyes. "No one's forcing them to stay. If they don't like it, they can quit." Olivia let out a shaky breath. Ben, the cook in the back, muttered under his breath, That's what most of them did. Robert took a step closer to Victor, his voice lowering to a dangerous calm. You think people should be grateful just to have a job, that they should put up with being treated like machines because that's how the real world works? No, that's how bad management works. And you're not a leader, you're a tyrant. Victor's face turned red. Who the hell do you think you are? You walk in here and start acting like you run the place. Robert took a deep breath. It was time. Because I do run this place. Silence. Victor blinked. What? Robert reached into his back pocket, pulling out his leather wallet. He flipped it open and pulled out his company ID, holding it up for everyone to see. The familiar name glared back at Victor in bold letters. Robert Sterling, CEO. The color drained from Victor's face. Olivia's eyes widened. The other employees gaped in shock. I am Robert Sterling, he said, his voice unwavering. I own this company, and I've just spent the last hour watching you destroy the very values I built it on. Victor stumbled over his words. Wait, this has to be a joke. Do I look like I'm joking? Robert's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now, a finality. You've humiliated employees, ignored customers, broken company policies, and let this restaurant fall into chaos. You're done, Victor. You're fired. Victor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You can't. Yes, I can, and I just did. Get your things and leave now. For the first time, Victor looked around. The employees, once afraid of him, now stood taller, their eyes shining with something they hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Even the customers seemed satisfied, some of them nodding in approval. Victor clenched his fists. You know what? Fine. This job was a joke anyway. With that, he stormed into the back to grab his things. The tension that had gripped the restaurant all day suddenly lifted, like a heavy weight had been removed from everyone's shoulders. Robert turned to the employees. Starting today, things will change. No more unfair scheduling. No more skipped breaks. No more disrespect. Olivia let out a breath she had been holding. You really mean that? Robert gave her a small, reassuring smile. I do. And I promise you, I'm going to fix this. Not just here, but across every location. A few customers clapped. Ben let out a relieved chuckle. Olivia wiped a tear from her eye. For the first time in a long time, Sterling's Savories felt like a place worth working for again. The weight of Victor's departure still lingered in the air, but for the first time in what felt like forever, the employees of Sterling's Savories finally breathed a sigh of relief. The toxic presence that had ruled over them was gone, yet an uneasiness remained. Change had begun, but there was still a long way to go. Robert knew that firing one bad manager wasn't enough. It was just the start. Standing in the middle of the restaurant, he took in the faces of his employees. Some still looked skeptical, unsure if things would truly improve. Others looked cautiously hopeful, as if they wanted to believe in the promise of change but had been disappointed too many times before. Olivia, her hands still shaking slightly from the stress of the day, turned to Robert. So, what now? Robert glanced at the kitchen, where Ben and the other cooks were still working through orders. The line of customers, though shorter now, still needed to be served. This was a business, after all, and no amount of policy changes could erase the fact that people needed their food. Now, Robert said, rolling up his sleeves, we get to work. Robert stepped behind the counter, grabbing an apron off the hook. The employees exchanged glances, confused. Wait, you're working? Ben asked, stepping out from the kitchen for a brief second. Like, actually working? Robert smirked. You think I can't handle a shift? Olivia laughed nervously. I mean, no. Offense, sir, but you're the CEO. You don't exactly look like you've flipped a burger in a while. Robert chuckled. It's been a few years, but I still remember the basics. With that, he took his place beside Olivia at the register. The next customer stepped up, an older woman who had watched the previous confrontation with quiet curiosity. She smiled knowingly. I guess I'll be your first customer as an employee, huh? Robert grinned. What can I get for you today, ma'am? He took her order, punched it into the system, and even handled the cash with a bit of clumsy effort. Olivia stifled a laugh as she subtly reached over to correct his button press. "Total's off by a few cents," she whispered. "Okay, so maybe I need a little refresher," Robert admitted with a chuckle. The restaurant slowly started to function more smoothly. Without Victor looming over them, the employees seemed to loosen up. Ben was able to take a short break for the first time that day, while Robert rotated between different positions, helping bag orders, running food to tables, and even stepping into the kitchen to flip a few burgers. Though Robert worked alongside them, he was still paying attention. He noticed how certain processes took too long, how the system itself was inefficient. This wasn't just a staffing problem, it was an operational one. As the afternoon rush settled down, Robert gathered the employees together for a quick meeting. They were exhausted, but for the first time, they weren't afraid to speak openly. "I want to hear from you," Robert said. "What's wrong? What needs to change?" Ben leaned against the counter, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need more people in the kitchen. 2 cooks for lunch rush? That's impossible." Olivia nodded. "And better schedules. We're always understaffed, and when people quit, we just have to pick up the slack without extra pay." A younger employee, Chloe, hesitated before speaking up. "And it'd be nice if managers actually helped instead of just yelling at us." Robert took notes. Every complaint, every frustration was valid. He had known things were bad, but hearing it directly from his employees made it hit even harder. "I hear you," he said, "and I'm going to fix this, not just here, but across every location." Olivia crossed her arms, skeptical. "With all due respect, sir, how do we know this isn't just another corporate promise that never happens?" Robert met her gaze. "Because I'll be back, and next time you won't see me coming." A few employees smiled at that. The Undercover CEO experiment had worked once. Who's to say he wouldn't do it again? The rest of the shift carried on with a new sense of energy. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Employees helped each other without fear of punishment. Customers noticed the difference too. Service was quicker, the atmosphere lighter. By the time the evening shift arrived, Robert finally stepped away. He removed his apron, running a hand through his hair, exhausted, yet satisfied. Olivia walked up to him. "I guess you weren't half bad on register." Robert laughed. "High praise." Ben smirked. "So, does this mean we all get a raise now?" Robert chuckled, but his expression turned serious. "What it means is that I've seen exactly what needs to change, and you all deserve better. Tomorrow, we start making those changes for real." Olivia smiled genuinely this time. "I'll believe it when I see it." Robert extended a hand. "Then I guess I better make you a believer." She shook his hand firmly. For the first time in a long time, the employees of Sterling Savories felt hopeful. And Robert, he felt something he hadn't in years: pride. The next morning, Robert Sterling arrived at Sterling Savories, not as an undercover employee, but as the CEO. This time there was no hoodie, no disguise. He walked in wearing a suit, his presence turning heads immediately. The employees who had worked with him the day before froze, their eyes widening as realization dawned on them. Olivia, standing behind the register, almost dropped the receipt she was holding. Ben, peeking out from the kitchen, let out a low whistle. The rest of the staff exchanged stunned glances, their minds struggling to process what was happening. But no one looked more horrified than Victor. The now former manager had returned despite being fired the previous day. He stormed out from the back office, his face red with anger. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. "What kind of joke is this?" Robert turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "No joke, Victor. You were fired yesterday. Did you really think you could just show up and pretend that didn't happen?" Victor scoffed, crossing his arms. "You can't just fire me. I've been running this place for years. You need me." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Need you? I watched you belittle employees, ignore customers, and treat this place like your personal kingdom. I don't need managers like that." Victor's confidence wavered as he realized the employees were no longer afraid of him. Instead of looking down or staying silent, they were watching, waiting, and some, like Olivia and Ben, were even smirking now. Robert continued, "I suggest you leave before security gets involved." Victor clenched his fists, his jaw tightening, but he saw the writing on the wall. With one final glare, he turned and stormed out of the restaurant. The sound of the door slamming behind him was like a weight lifting off everyone's shoulders. A moment of silence followed, then applause. Customers and employees alike clapped, a few even cheering. It wasn't just about Victor being gone. It was about what it meant. Things were finally changing. Robert let them have the moment before raising a hand to quiet the room. "All right, let's talk about what happens next." He gestured for everyone to gather around. The employees hesitated for a second before forming a loose circle near the counter, their faces a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "I spent yesterday working alongside you," Robert said, "and I saw firsthand what's wrong. You've been overworked, underappreciated, and led by someone who never should have been in charge. That ends today." Olivia crossed her arms. "And how do we know things won't just go back to how they were?" Robert nodded, expecting the skepticism. "Because starting now, we're making real changes. And I don't just mean in this store, I mean company-wide." He looked at Ben first. "We're hiring more staff, so you're not stuck running the kitchen alone. No more exhausting double shifts without breaks." Ben let out a breath of relief. "About time." Robert turned to Olivia. "Second, better scheduling. No more unpredictable shifts or unfair hour cuts. Employees will have set schedules with guaranteed breaks, and managers will be trained to actually help their teams, not just bark orders." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "And if they don't?" Robert smiled. "Then they won't be managers for long." A few employees chuckled, but there was an unmistakable sense of satisfaction in the air. "Third," Robert continued, "we're launching a direct employee feedback system. If something isn't working, whether it's management, policies, or day-to-day operations, you'll have a way to report it, anonymously if needed, and I will personally review those reports." A murmur of approval rippled through the group. For the first time in a long time, it felt like their voices actually mattered. Robert then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "And finally, effective immediately, we're increasing wages for all hourly employees. Starting pay is going up, and existing employees will receive raises based on tenure and performance." Silence. Then, "Wait, what?" Olivia's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Robert nodded. "You deserve to be paid fairly for the work you do. That's non-negotiable." For a second, no one spoke. Then the room erupted. Some clapped, others cheered. A few even hugged each other. Ben pumped his fist in the air. "Best shift ever!" And Olivia, still in shock, looked up at Robert. "Why are you doing this?" "Most CEOs wouldn't care enough to come down here, let alone work a shift." Robert smiled, but there was a hint of something heavier behind it. "Because I lost sight of what mattered. I built this company on the idea that great food and great people go hand in hand. But somewhere along the way, I let bad management ruin that. I let people like Victor take control. That's on me, and now I'm fixing it." Olivia studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, I think you just gave us a reason to believe you." Robert extended a hand. "Then let's make this place something we can all be proud of." She shook his hand, and the employees around them clapped again. The energy in the room had completely transformed. What had once been a place filled with stress and resentment was now filled with hope. As Robert stepped back, he looked around. The restaurant, the employees smiling, the customers happy, the place finally running like it should. For the first time in years, he felt like he had his company back. 1 month later, Sterling's Savories was almost unrecognizable. The same restaurant that had once been drowning in chaos now thrived with energy and efficiency. The air inside was no longer thick with tension, but filled with the hum of employees who actually enjoyed their work. Customers who had once sighed in frustration now lingered, chatting happily as they ate. And best of all, the employees who had once worked in fear now moved with confidence. Robert Sterling sat at a corner booth, unnoticed for the moment. He sipped his coffee, watching as his vision for the company was finally coming to life. Olivia stood at the register, her posture straighter, her energy lighter. She wasn't just surviving the job anymore, she was leading. The once overwhelmed cashier was now the store's assistant manager. Ben, now working with a fully staffed kitchen, prepped meals without the frantic rush that had once plagued him. More workers had been hired, and their schedules were actually fair. And as for Victor, gone. This wasn't just a single success story. This was a company-wide shift. Over the past few weeks, Robert had gone on a mission. He had visited multiple Sterling Savories locations without warning, stepping into restaurants as a customer, watching how they operated. And while not every store had been as broken as this one, the problems ran deep. Managers like Victor had been quietly removed, scheduling policies were rewritten, breaks were enforced, and the employee feedback system, it had already flagged multiple issues that were being fixed in real time. This was just the beginning. As Robert took another sip of coffee, Olivia finally spotted him. Her eyes widened before she grinned and walked over. "Didn't think you'd be back so soon," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Robert smirked. "Told you I'd be checking in." Olivia crossed her arms. "So, how do we rate?" He glanced around, noting the clean tables, the efficient service, the smiling employees. "Looks like an entirely different place," he admitted. "I'm impressed." Olivia laughed. "Well, turns out when you treat people like human beings, they actually want to do their jobs." Robert chuckled. "Who would have thought?" Ben appeared from the kitchen, tossing his apron over his shoulder. "Okay, boss," he said. "Level with us. Are we your favorite location now?" Robert leaned back, pretending to think. You're definitely top 5. Ben groaned, and Olivia rolled her eyes. "Wow," typical CEO response. They all laughed. It felt good, natural. This was the kind of atmosphere Robert had always wanted for his company, but for years he had been too far removed to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. But never again. "I hope you both know," Robert said, his tone turning more serious, "that this is just the beginning. We're going to keep improving, and if anything ever starts slipping again, I expect you to speak up." Olivia smirked. "Oh, don't worry, you're never going undercover again without us noticing." Robert laughed. "I guess I'll have to get more creative next time." Ben leaned forward. "Hey, as long as you don't try making fries again, that was painful to watch." Robert held up his hands in surrender. Fine, I'll leave the cooking to the professionals." As he stood to leave, he took one last look around. The change wasn't just in the store itself, but in the people. The employees had their pride back, their voices, their dignity. In Sterling Savories, it was finally on the path he had always envisioned. For the first time in years, Robert Sterling walked out of his restaurant knowing one thing for certain. This was the company he had always meant to build.